Okay, here we go. So, Dr. Savage, thank you so much for your time today. Of course, I'm very excited to speak with you. And I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about your new book, Mass Hysteria, and especially because of the day and age we live in. And then, of course, on top of that, we have not just the hysteria from the Mueller witch hunt, but then on top of that, this past week, we've seen the mass hysteria, which is exactly what you're speaking about, and it's with this Kavanaugh hearing for the Supreme Court. So I'm just, very excited to hear your thoughts on this whole.
Well, let me begin by stating in the beginning that there's a huge difference between mass hysteria and justified concern, and this is something we have to understand. There are imagined threats, and then there is real danger, as we all know. And this is an imagined threat that Kavanaugh poses a threat to all women on the planet, that he's some mad rapist, that if he gets on the Supreme Court, he'll run around making the climate of rape more acceptable. This is the greatest example of mass hysteria since the Trump derangement syndrome. And it's a continuation, of course, of the hatred for Trump and of the hatred for those of us who supported Donald Trump and Donald Trump's agenda, really, more than Donald Trump, because it's really not about Donald Trump, it's about the agenda, which is largely based upon this moderate nationalism that I've offered for many, many years, and everybody knows that. But
right.
I want to get into this issue that you ask, the mass hysteria.
Right.
Now, if you look back through history, real history, not agenda masquerading as history, which is all that you get from the media today.
Sure.
We will see that there is real danger that we face today, as opposed to imagined threats, which we don't really face today, other than those offered by the left-wing media and by the left-wing politicians. Fake threats as opposed to real threats. What is the number one greatest threat to America today? Radical Islam. For the last 1,400 years, radical Islam has been at war with the world. This is not Islamophobia, as the mainstream media would have you believe.
Right.
It is history. It is history. And I urge anyone listening to this interview or reading Gateway Pundit to look at the list without the bias that I mentioned in this book, meaning indoctrination versus truth. And if you go back just 40 years for just a partial listing of the atrocities of radical Islam, 1979, the U.S. Embassy in Iran, as I list, I have 2 pages of it, right through 2015. And the chapter is entitled From Salem to CNN. And it's an interesting connection from Salem to CNN, because they're not too different, are they?
Not at all. Yeah, and it gets worse by the day.
Now, I don't want to go into the Salem witch trials, but we're living through the equivalent of the Salem witch trials right now. While there is actually a real war against women, but it's not coming from Christian conservatives like Kavanaugh. The real war against women is coming from the radical feminists, who are actually debasing feminists and debasing women across America with false accusations, or let's say exaggerated accusations. Right.
And it seems to me, Doctor, that it's not just women who are under attack by these. Was it you who coined the term feminazi? I'm not sure if that was you.
No, I think that was someone else.
Right.
I wouldn't use it because it's an overuse of the word Nazi. I call them fem-fascists in Stop Mass Hysteria. It's the same thing. It's
sure.
a form of totalitarianism, no matter how cute you phrase it.
Right.
This is what went on, as you well know, in the Soviet Union under Stalin. It went on first in the French Revolution, as I've said on my radio show over and over again, since the first liberals got hammered and hit with the guillotine. I said, watch out, because tomorrow it's going to be you. Let's not celebrate the fall of the Harvey Weinstein so quickly. As piggish and as horrendous as he is, let's have a damn trial before we all rush to burn him at the stake. Because if we rush to judgment without a fair trial, any one of us could get it. Well, I said that when the Weinstein thing started.
Right.
Look where we are today. The left is eating its own, as they did in the French Revolution, the Soviet Union, Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution, Pol Pot's revolution. The left starts by killing their enemies, the so-called counter-revolutionaries, and then when the counter-revolutionaries have all been killed, they start killing their cohorts. And that's the problem with these mass hysterias, Jim.
Right.
Is that it's like a virus. It's like as an trained epidemiologist, it's really an epidemic. It's almost a medical situation. This madness is very similar to an epidemic that continues to spread through the population without discriminating who it attacks. That's the point. And so in Stop Mass Hysteria, I try to bring real history to the discussion rather than straight polemics. And I hope that people will understand that even in an age of vacuity, which is what we're living in, there's a place for history and politics combined.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that the women are under attack from the feminists. And yet most, I think a lot of people are obviously seeing that, young men, I would be frightened if I had a young adolescent boy. It's just frightening what can come up 30 years later that they, what we're seeing today. It's unbelievable, actually.
I talked about it on my show this week. I appealed to liberal listeners to the show, women, because I have a large independent audience. They're not diehard Republicans in large parts. And I have always been an independent. And I said, ladies, listen to me, women, listen carefully. Don't you have a brother, a son, an uncle, a nephew who's a child? Do you want this child facing the equivalent of this mass hysteria for the rest of his life for someone he may have kissed in the 5th grade? Is this the world you want to live in, where a boy is afraid to say hello to a girl that he finds attractive? This is how civilization has existed from the beginning. And listen, this is not happening in a vacuum, Jim.
Right.
I know it sounds a little ludicrous, but I do study history. And I know this is a big jump. This is not coming out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But I've quoted this on my radio show for the last few weeks since this mass hysteria of the Kavanaugh trials have come up, which is, I read Karl Marx when I was 18. If you just read Karl Marx in a cursory manner, you will see he calls marriage and family both bourgeois institutions that have to be dissolved in order for the state to take control of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So they start by debasing the family. Sound familiar?
Absolutely.
Then they start mocking marriage. Sound familiar?
Absolutely.
Then they make sex as readily available as a sneeze in the night. Sound familiar?
Oh, and not just sex, doctor, but just the crudest kinds of sex, that
well, there you go.
Seen.
So what happens is the whole idea of love and marriage going together like a horse and carriage, leading to family, ends. And what happens? Birth rates plummet in the Western world. Check that on the box.
Sure.
Birth rates of immigrants from more primitive cultures, so-called, continue to rise. Run the curves out 20 years and you'll see what happens to Europe and the United States of America, which is already happening.
Right.
Now, you say it's not happening in a vacuum. I said it's not happening in a vacuum. It's not. It's by design. This is by design. Because see, this messaging is not hitting the minority communities at all. This messaging is not, it's hitting only the educated Caucasian population, by and large. They take this garbage seriously. And as a result, we have this declining birth rate. But I don't want to get too far afield. I want to stick to the issues that we are talking about.
Well, where do you see this mass hysteria leading to with the prime example with Kavanaugh today?
It could metastasize and get much worse, where the most prominent men in our society are destroyed in the very near future. This is going to be our Waterloo. If we do not expose the Dianne Feinsteins for the vicious criminals that they actually are. Look who did this to him.
Yeah.
It was a concerted effort of the entire left-wing movement to wait until the hearings were over to unleash this charge against him. And who did it? Dianne Feinstein. Is she as pure as the driven snow? Have we all gotten collective mass amnesia as to who this woman is?
Right.
Remember just a few months ago it was revealed that she had a spy from China? driving her for 16 years and running her office, and I didn't know he was a spy. Remember that story?
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. Why is there no Senate hearing on that instead of on Kavanaugh? But the boldness, the brazenness of the left is such that doesn't get a hearing? But rolling on a bed when the guy was in high school, that becomes an international incident? Now, let's go back to that incident itself.
Right.
First of all, if it occurred at all, well, let me start by saying rape is about the worst thing anyone can do to anyone.
Sure.
I've said it for years, for 15 years. Rape is one of the worst things that can ever happen to a person. It destroys their soul. And whoever commits rape, for real, should be punished to the full extent of the law. I want to be very clear about that because I've been clear about it for years. But having said that, accusing someone of such a crime is a crime unto itself. And
right.
so let's look at what's happening right now. They were both underage. He was not 21 or 18. He was a boy, Kavanaugh. He himself was an underage person of 17. And here's the irony, Jim.
Yeah.
The very same left that claims that when a teen, again, emphasis on the word teen, commits a crime, we shouldn't try that teen as an adult because their brains are not fully developed. That's been the argument of the ACLU and the radical left forever, right?
Right.
Oh, the poor teen shouldn't be tried as a full adult because their brains aren't developed. Then they bring in one wingnut after another from Harvard or NYU who shows pictures of the developing brain, and the teen is given a pass for the crime he may have committed. Well, Kavanaugh was 17 if this occurred. Boy and girl. She was a girl, he was a boy. Can we give him, even if it happened, can we say he was a boy at the time? He's not a man. He wasn't a man.
Right.
He was a boy. That's number one. That's if it happened. That's number one. Number two, as I spent a lot of time on my radio show describing human memory is extremely unreliable. And I talked about the science of childhood memory and imagination. And there's a phenomenon developed by psychologists entitled imagination inflation. Imagination inflation, which means that if you imagine a childhood event occurred, it inflates a confidence that it actually occurred if you just imagine it occurred. And it's known as counterfactual imaginings. And they have far-reaching implications. And experiments have been done, notably by Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, and publications have been published on this. And I had her on my show, where we learned human memory is known to be unreliable, and that Christine Ford, through no fault of her own, may be suffering from the same unconscious memory problems that we all are vulnerable to. And I give an example. Eyewitness accounts of crimes are very inaccurate, and this is interesting. The left wing, meaning the George Soros-funded Innocence Project, which goes out of its way to prove that crimes are not committed by selected individuals.
Right.
Well, even the Innocence Project determined that 75% of the 239 cases it reviewed had occurred due to inaccurate eyewitness testimony. So eyewitness accounts of crimes are very inaccurate, right?
Right.
So Christine, Dr. Freud, I call her, by the way, at this time. It's a combination of Freud and fraud. Actually, it's a combination of Freud and Ford. Dr. Freud, as I affectionately call her,
Right.
could be remembering an assault by another boy at another time, but a dislike of Kavanaugh and his friends intruded at the time or later to cause her to associate him with the event. Perhaps someone told her that Kavanaugh was a bad sort, likely to do such things. Maybe recent events, such as the Me Too movement, have elevated a mild bit of misbehavior to the level of a full-on assault and confusing it with rape. Now, this is related to cognitive science. This is related to the fact that memory is subject to social bias, suggestibility, and retroactive interference, all documented in the scientific literature. But I think we're getting too focused on this one issue. This is an example of the mass hysteria of the times. And I like to say that your question to me, that you sent to me in writing, I want to I wanted to
Sure.
to go to some of these questions.
Great.
You say in your latest book you point to several episodes in American history where the public was so easily duped to believing unbelievable things. Well, rather than reading from my own book, From Salem to CNN and How Hysteria Taught Us to Anesthetize Ourselves, I'd rather people read it themselves. But I would like to answer, how would you rate the current political climate in America? How?
Yeah.
I would say right now the mass hysteria is greater than it ever has been in my lifetime, and I'm not too young. But let's put my own lifetime aside. Let's look at the McCarthy era, the mass hysteria, both pro and con. Let's go before that to the 1930s, the War of the Worlds by Orson Welles, right, that freaked America out that Martians had landed.
Right.
Okay. Neither of those events created as much panic as we now see as a result of the constant drumbeat from the media and from the radical left driving the media. The engine of the radical media is the left-wing movement in America.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So I would rate the mass hysteria we're living through right now, I'm saying aside from this current example, the one we've lived through since Trump has been elected, is a massive propaganda campaign unlike any I've ever seen in my lifetime. And as I've so jokingly said, not so jokingly said on my show, if Donald Trump were announced tomorrow from the Oval Office that he has been working secretly with scientists and he has the cure for Alzheimer's disease, and here it is with 3 scientists.
Right.
Here's the headline in the Washington Post. Trump admits he held back cure for Alzheimer's for months, thereby causing unnecessary suffering amongst millions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This is how crazy it's become. You know, when I was in the White House in April,
Right.
I told the story before. It's kind of funny, but telling.
And those pictures, by the way, excuse me, those pictures were out there on Twitter, which that was pretty cool.
Yeah, the one of me at his desk. So I'm sitting there, and we're talking, and about 10 minutes into the conversation, there's a black box on his desk with a red light on it, and it starts to flash. The red light flashes, and he presses the button. This was at the height of the North Korea tension.
Wow.
I looked at him and I said, Mr. President, did you just launch a nuclear war? So President Trump looks at me and he gives me that sarcastic face he's known for. And he said, yeah, I just launched an atomic bomb. And you can wait for the timing. He's got great New York timing. Yeah, I just launched an atomic bomb. Would you like a Diet Coke? I just ordered one for my belly. Okay. So I tell the story the next day on my radio show, and here's the headline in the quote conservative Washington Examiner. President Trump jokes about nuclear war with radio talk show host Michael Savage.
Oh my gosh.
Now I don't know who was being sarcastic here. Are they kidding? Why would the Washington Examiner report a thing like that in that way? Even they had to get in on the Trump bashing to sell a newspaper, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, here's another example. So it's spread now. It's not just limited, by the way, the mass hysteria that I talk about in the book, Stop Mass Hysteria. It's not just limited to the left. There's a lot of mass hysteria on the right. The problem is let's not confuse reality with fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, an interesting thing that we're seeing today is that even which goes back to your story you just told. When Trump cracks a joke, the media is taking it seriously. When he cracks a joke at his rallies that he wants Putin to look at Hillary's emails, the media takes it seriously and they quote it now in their Mueller reports. So it's completely insane. The left has lost their sense of humor completely, unless it involves attacking Republicans or Trump, it seems.
Well, it sells newspapers and has people watching TV. Now, I want to talk about the children of America today because I think it's important to state that today's youth are the targets and cause of campus progressives. Right. Children have always been victims of manipulation. The testimony of children was used against the supposed witches in Salem, Massachusetts. It was used, the testimony of children was used to destroy teachers in the McMartin trials that destroyed lives. It was all hysteria. Children are the ones whose minds are being anesthetized right now and destroyed by drugs, including marijuana. Throughout history, those who perpetrated hysteria throughout history are immune from the consequences. And the essential question our nation has been forced to ask over and over is this: who is pulling the strings and why?
Right. Right. And what's did you get to the answer to that, Doctor?
Well, we know the answer. We know the answer and why. It's the left that wants to just bring it all down, man.
Right.
And rebuild society in its own image, which is an image that's a nightmare.
Sure.
Because it's not going to be good for anyone, including left-wingers. They're going to go under the guillotine as well. That's what we're trying to say. Mm-hmm. Once the guillotine starts to fall, as evidenced by every revolution, including the French Revolution, nobody's immune.
Right. And do you see the mass hysteria? You obviously, we're at a critical point in our history. Do you see this mass hysteria? We've already seen some violence. Do you see that ramping up? What's your prediction on that?
Oh, it's going to get much worse just before the election. The left-wing armies are activated, motivated, funded, and weaponized. There's no question, by the way.
Right.
And so there's no question this is going to get worse. And look what's going on right now. The women screaming during the Kavanaugh hearings. Why are they even allowed into those hearing rooms? Why have we lost the dignity of our own Congress to these radicals? Where is it written that you're allowed to allow a ragtag bunch of agitators into a hearing? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
Now, I need to say that not all hysteria is manufactured. There are real issues that should create some kind of mass concern, even, a fanaticism to defend ourselves.
Right. Right.
But I mean, there are reasons to unify the people, like we all saw after 9/11, and we woke up to the radical invasion of radical Islam and what it did to this country, and the stupidity of the left breaking down our defense cells so that they were allowed to come into airports at Logan, fly to where they wanted to go with almost no inspection, right?
Yeah, tragic.
So not all hysteria is manufactured, and we have to watch out here. And we have to remember that at the end, reason will always trump hysteria.
Amen.
And I truly believe that in the end, reason will trump hysteria.
Okay.
And I believe this mania we are living through will eventually die of its own oxygen deprivation.
Right.
But in the meantime, a generation of minds is being ruined.
Oh, yeah.
And on a more direct basis to what you're talking about and your questions of me, we have to remember that the first victim of hysteria is fact. And the modern era has seen several great hysterias fueled by nothing more than dubious science. Unproven science renewed its long and ugly reign when dietary experts held that food we have been eating for millennia has turned against us and continues today as alarmists try to convince us that the planet is baking itself to death. I don't have to even go into the subjects that I'm talking about.
Right.
Mankind has eaten wheat from the beginning of time. You look at pictures of ancient Egypt, or you look at every culture on the planet. The Mexican folks have the tortilla, right? The Indian people have the Arabs have pita bread. The Indian people have roti. We have bread. The Romans actually paid their soldiers in bread. And now all of a sudden we wake up and some hippie scientists, if you want to call them that, some hippie pseudoscientists tell us, oh, the wheat of today is not like the wheat of the other times. It's causing every imaginable disease on the planet, from hysteria to ADD to halitosis. So now all of a sudden people are gluten-free. Well, there are people with celiac disease who do get sick from gluten products that contain this protein gliadin. But it doesn't apply to the whole world. It's laughable, for God's sakes.
Right.
Again, based on the hysteria. This hysteria is based upon false science. So the nation creates new venues for hysteria, and poisonous ideas do spread unless they're confronted with reason.
Okay.
Is that enough for today?
it's phenomenal. I guess then you're saying that reason will overcome, but we're seeing today. So this is my last question. We're seeing today then that there is no reason I'm going to say on the left. It's just all emotion and getting people to start screaming at someone and do these violent acts. So how is reason going to overcome this mass hysteria?
What you just described is bullying. At the end of the day, the left is using bullying tactics. The pink hats, the screaming in the congressional hearing. Is this not bullying? Isn't it trying to force people into submission through a bullying tactic?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's bullies at work. And what's going to happen in our country is that there's a huge middle class in voters. Huge, undecided. We all know it's bigger than the Democrats, bigger than the Republicans.
Right.
They're watching this, and they're saying, I want nothing to do with that group. I want nothing to do with this form of bullying, this violent hysteria that they're using. I want nothing to do with it. I'm going to vote against them. And I don't think there's going to be this continuation for as long as we fear. I mean, it would be easy for me to say it's going to get worse, and it will get worse before it gets better. But a conclusion for this interview where I say stop mass hysteria, it's America's insanity from the Salem witch trials to the Trump witch hunt. Eventually, these things burn out. They're like epidemics, and all epidemics burn out, Jim. Eventually, they burn out. How long it will take, I don't know.
Right.
Even the Soviet Union, didn't it burn itself out?
Absolutely.
Well, it took a long time, and 100 million people had to die because of the false economic belief system of Karl Marx. Look what one man did to the world.
Yeah.
Look what one man did with one book, Jim. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
The power of ideas is phenomenal to me.
Yeah.
One book, and Marxian economics yielded 100 million deaths. And so, we don't know how far this will go, this mass hysteria against men, because that's what we're living in right now, at this particular moment in our history. This is a mass hysteria against men. And look at the lawyers, look what they look like. The meanest women on the planet. You can see her there, the Feinsteins. What is she covering up by doing this? What is she doing to this decent man?
Yeah.
While she herself should be under investigation, not him.
Right. Yeah, it's things are upside down, Doctor. I'm so glad you wrote this book, and I look forward to reading it myself. And I can't wait to get to some of the answers to all these questions that we brought up today. But thank you for your work and for what you've done for the past 22 years and longer. And it's really an honor to speak with you today.
Well, Jim, I love your Gateway Pundit. And
thank you.
You know what I would love to do? I don't know if this is audio quality enough. This is off the record, but if it is, I run it on my show. This has been a great interview with you.
Oh, well, thank you.
And if you get a good copy up on Gateway Pundit, let me know when it's up.
Definitely.
And I'll run it on my radio show. I'd like to see what people think about it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your time. Have a good.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I appreciate
Bye now, Jim.
it. Okay. Bye.